Much. All right.
Thank you, Amma. And I know the portal that we've set up in Kabul as of August has been a great success. And the other week we had Afghan calligraphers in the portal meeting with Burmese dancers. So you do have really these very unexpected moments. Next up we have Lina Rozbih from Voice of America, where she's a managing editor and also a poet. Lina.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to USIP and the Smithsonian Office of International Relations for convening this timely symposium. The topic that I'm about to talk to you about, I think it belongs more to the previous panel, but they placed me in this panel, so you have to listen to it. You have no choice. When we speak about a country's culture, we essentially speak of its identity. And to understand a nation or a country, knowledge of its culture and history are essential. Historical monuments in any country are symbols of people's culture and identity that must be respected and protected. But when the mission of the enemy is the destruction of a culture and identity of a nation with the hope of replacing it with some other ideology, historical and cultural sites are targeted and therefore destroyed. If you want to erase any country's civilization, it's enough to destroy and eliminate its cultural heritage, and this is what took place in Afghanistan during years of conflict, especially under the rule of Taliban. Examples of such attempts include the destruction and looting of many historical sites, targeting and killing of Afghan poets, writers, and artists, as well as banning of music, banning of painting, and any forms of arts. Indeed, the rebuilding of a country's infrastructure usually needs a few decades of peace and stability, but the restoration of its cultural heritage and enabling its nation to regain their lost civilization might take centuries. 5 decades of war in Afghanistan not only destroyed much of the country's infrastructure, but also the social fabrics and severely damaged Afghan culture, custom, and traditions. The war's devastating impact on Afghan cultural heritage was sadly started by Soviet invasion. During the first years of Soviet occupation in early 1980s, several historical sites such as Bakhtar, Tala Tepe, Tepe Maranjan, Tepe Kafarha, and Tepe Kalan were looted by pro-Russian government forces with the help of local villagers. Most of the findings, including small statues, were then taken to Pakistan and sold in Pakistani bazaars. The looting of historical sites continued well into Civil War and Mujahideen era. There were reports of merchants and private foreign antique collectors and buyers who traveled to Pakistan and some even to Afghanistan with the hope of purchasing Afghan looted historical artifacts. The world came to know Taliban better with the destruction of Buddha statues in 2001. The Buddhas of Bamiyan were the world's 2 largest Buddhas, standing well over 150 feet high. The Taliban used tanks and rockets to destroy this 1,700-year-old historical site. Bamiyan Buddhas did not only constitute the Afghan cultural heritage, but were also an integral part of the World Heritage Sites recognized by UNESCO. Moreover, the National Museum of Afghanistan was once one of the richest museums of the whole region. It stored and exhibited invaluable cultural artifacts from centuries ago that underpin the Afghan identity and the many values, customs, and traditions that we take pride in as Afghans. Unfortunately, however, this rich museum was looted multiple times under Soviet, Mujahideens, and then Taliban. Taliban systematically destroyed many remaining artifacts, smashing them into pieces beyond restoration. Throughout years of war, particularly under the Taliban, the large archive of Afghan national radio and television was destroyed. Many of the archives records were damaged, except a few that were saved by archives guards. Afghanistan, much like Syria, whose cultural heritage sites have been systematically destroyed by Daesh, was targeted by the dark forces of radicalism and Wahhabism. That is why under the Taliban, the destruction of historical sites increased, music was forbidden, drawing any image was forbidden, poetry was forbidden, and statues and sculptures were associated with polytheism and therefore forbidden too. But since the fall of Taliban in 2001, efforts have been made internationally to restore Afghan cultural heritage. Tangibly, assistance from UNESCO and other international organizations and bilateral aid have enabled Afghanistan to reconstruct some of the key cultural heritage sites in Bamiyan, Ghazni, Herat, Balkh, and other Afghan provinces. The Islamic Educational and Scientific and Cultural Organization in 2013 recognized Ghazni as a capital of Islamic culture, and UNESCO also published 4 series of books in 2012 promoting the city's historical heritage. University of Chicago, with the help of Department of State, is now supporting National Museum of Afghanistan. And of course, we have projects like Turquoise Mountain that introduce the rich culture of Afghanistan to the host country here. Intangibly, although writing poetry and literature were forbidden under Taliban, perhaps the only achievement of decades of war and its tragedies which affected every Afghan includes some extraordinary literary works of poetry and novels by Afghans abroad and inside that country. Fiction and novels such as Kite Runner, A Thousand Splendid Sun, and The Patient Stones by authors like Khaled Hosseini and Atiq Rahimi attracted many foreign readers to Afghanistan and encouraged them to learn and read more about the country. The novels educate the readers about the complex, multi-layered Afghan society with many taboos and restrictions that otherwise are unknown to the foreigners. On poetry's side, decades of war, violence, rise and fall of regimes, poverty, and tragedy did not eliminate Afghans' love and passion for poetry. In fact, those experiences gave birth to new genre of poetry, poetry of resistance or sher-e muqawmat. The literary revolution, which is captured in the work of contemporary Afghan poets and writers, can be summed up as Afghanistan's informal history. Although Afghans could not keep a record or document many tragic events of war during past 5 decades, but the poems of every poet illustrate Afghan suffering in different time and era. Decade of war gave Afghan writers and poets so much painful sensation and tragedy that, unfortunately, writing poetry for most of us, including myself, happens naturally without any kind of effort. There is no lack of suffering in any Afghan's life. In every corner and street of Afghanistan, there are countless stories of tragedy before which the work of Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, fails and pales. And it is because of this scattered group of Afghan poets, writers, and artists that Afghanistan's literature survived. But the poetry of my generation is no longer the Sufi mystic spiritual poem and poetry of Maulana Jalaluddin Balkhi, known as Rumi. Rumi's poems are filled with mysticism, love, and affection. The poetry of my generation speaks of war, suicide bombing, blood, death, explosions, suffering, tears, and endless pain. Last year, I published my collection of over 140 poems in a book titled The Promise of Paradise, in which every poem was written in reaction to a suicide attack, a bomb explosion, or speak of violence against women and children, or the difficulties facing a largely illiterate society split apart by ethnic tension and political entrepreneurs that capitalize on the ethno-sectarian and linguistic diversity of Afghans. Sadly, you cannot find one happy poem in this collection. Unfortunately, war and war-related issues has sadly disabled the positive sensation and affection of most writers and poets. It is almost impossible to be Afghan and not write about pain and suffering. But I'm confident that if not for my generation, the future generations will be able to write happy poems again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lina. And lastly, we're going to hear from Dr. Bastien Varoutsikos, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in Paris, and also Secretary of Heritage for Peace, an NGO.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. Hello, everyone. I'm very grateful for being invited here to take part in this very interesting and I think essential discussion. So I'll present today some of the